Now, some might object to including beliefs and hopes and fears on a list of economic factors. And yet, what exactly could something called a consumer confidence index be measuring, if not our inmost mental and emotional states? Now, my expansive description of the factors that make up what we call the economy includes beliefs, and not just beliefs about the state of the economy, but deeply moral and religious beliefs about such matters as how to live a worthy life, how to honor one's parents and care for one's children, how to attend to the needs of widows and orphans and other dispossessed peoples, how to love one's neighbors, how to honor the demands of our creatureliness and the shape of creation. Such beliefs are clearly relevant to the economic decisions made every day by individuals, by families, and by companies, as well as by government policy. But when we think explicitly about the economy, such concerns are usually ignored. We usually don't bring how one thinks about the nature of creation into our thinking explicitly about the economy. When we talk about economics, we generally accept the presupposition that such concerns can be safely set aside when we make economic choices, as long as we seek our own self-interest. An invisible hand will arrange all of those billions of decisions into the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But economic choices are never just about the generation and maintenance of wealth. There are always non-financial factors intertwined with work and money. We could call them cultural factors or even religious factors. But when that big abstraction, the economy, is discussed and analyzed, such factors often go unrecognized or unreckoned. Many people do seem to believe that the economic crisis we're living through is not just a failure of financial machinery, but a widespread moral problem. But it's rare to hear such an acknowledgement from those in Washington and New York who are entrusted to fix such things. George Will noted in a column written last September, quote, "We are waist-deep in evasions because one cannot talk sense about the cultural roots of the financial crisis without transgressing this cardinal principle of politics: never shall be heard a discouraging word about the public." We can't say that our wants and desires, our loves and hopes are disordered in some way, profoundly disordered, because you can't get elected to do that. And if you can't get elected, then you're never going to be able to fix anything. But if what you have to do to be elected in order to fix something is to deny this moral dimension, that obviously creates problems as well. Now, I think that this evasiveness is more, however, than just political craftiness. It's also a function of the great modern tendency, the general modern tendency, to compartmentalize various aspects of life and turn them over to specialists. According to this way of thinking, which is very, very much a part of the fabric of modernity, the material aspects of life, the world of hard stuff described by hard facts, have nothing essentially to do with the non-material world of moral judgments. The word value in economics and value in ethics have no essential relationship. Although that's a new thing. As I'll mention later, economics was once a subset of ethics, which itself was a subset of theology, until about the 18th century. Christians live in the shadow of this schizophrenic assumption that the economic world and the moral world are conveniently separable. We live in a disorienting condition. We are persons striving to be moral, both personally and communally, seeking disciplines to train and restrain our desires, while we navigate a consumer economy whose health depends on the relentless expansion of possibilities for gratifying desires. I was thinking last night, what cultural institutions promote contentment? I couldn't come up with a long list. Now, the word economics, I don't think I've said this yet, does come from a Greek word for household, and it's always helpful to remember that etymology, because that's a much bigger image, much bigger metaphor than the kinds of things we put on spreadsheets. There's a wonderful essay by Wendell Berry called Christianity and the Survival of Creation, in which he talks about this etymological sense of economy. He writes, if we are to maintain any sense of coherence or meaning in our lives, we cannot tolerate the present utter disconnection between religion and economy. By economy, I do not mean economics, which is the study of money-making, he says rather cynically, but by economy, the ways of human housekeeping, the ways by which the human household is situated and maintained within the household of nature, I would say creation. To be uninterested in economy is to be uninterested in the practice of religion. It is to be uninterested in culture and in character. Perhaps the most urgent question now faced by people who would adhere to the Bible is this: what sort of economy would be responsible to the holiness of life? What, for Christians, would be the economy, the practices, and the restraints of right livelihood? And regarding these questions, Berry goes on to assert, I do not believe that organized Christianity now has any idea. He's very cynical about whether Christians answer this question well, and makes that accusation because he sees in much of American Christianity a willingness to separate religion and economy that he finds intolerable. As I mentioned a minute ago, it was once the case that thinking about the economy was a subset of ethics, which in turn was a subset of theology. This, I would suggest, is no longer the case, even among most Christians. Now, how did we get here, and should we stay here? A recent book by historian Stuart Davenport, a relatively young scholar who I was pleased to interview recently, examines the roots of the separation of economic thinking from theology in early to mid-19th century America. The book is called Friends of the Unrighteous Mammon, and it tells a fascinating story about how American Christians responded to the economic, technical, and social changes of the early 19th century, and he focuses on, in his own words, a single question. What did Christians in America think about capitalism when capitalism was first something to be thought about? And in seeking answers to this question, Davenport was also trying to understand a paradox in American religious history. That, in his words, Americans simultaneously and paradoxically subscribe to both the Christian ethic of humility and selflessness and the American liberal capitalist ethic of competition, success, and self-promotion. It is almost as if many Americans have gone about trying to understand themselves and their world with the Bible in one hand and John Locke in the other. Now, he argues that that's paradoxical. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that's entirely consistent. And I would suggest it's either because they're misreading Locke or they're misreading the Bible, I'm sorry to say. Davenport's book is subtitled Northern Christians and Market Capitalism, 1815 to 1860. And he looks at the rise of new economic structures in that period, a more sophisticated banking system, new patterns of trade enabled by an expanding network of roads, canals, railroads, and steam-powered river transportation, and new commercial patterns that were enabled by these mechanisms of transport and manufacture. And accompanying these practical opportunities was a new body of ideas which was developed in a new intellectual discipline which was called political economy, brand new discipline, spawned by the 1776 publication of Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations. The popularity of this new discipline conformed to the 18th century fad for all things that claimed a scientific basis. If you lived in the mid-18th century and you found out that something was scientific, that's got a cachet of power and authority, attractiveness about it. Wanting to be scientific was the spirit of the age. Adam Smith and the ideas he inspired fulfilled two ideals of the Enlightenment. First, the exaltation of the autonomous individual, and second, the